What we're going to do here is we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be an instructional consultant and working with clients. I think that one of the nice things about this class is that this particular activity where you engage with a client is really important because that's, is really representative of what you do in work in this field. So you work as an instructional designer. You often are designing instruction in content that you don't know. You're working with clients that are more knowledgeable, that know the domain, and that help you sort of design and develop the content. So, when I think of our field, I often think of our field as a technology. So our field is learning, design, and technology, and the fact that our last name is technology, it implies that we're technology geeks that lock up in a computer cubicle and do our work in our cubicle. But in fact, our field is a field where we interact with people a lot, and we use technology as part of the interaction, particularly for learners. And so if you think of yourself as a guy who sits in the back cubicle programming all the time, to some extent you can do that kind of work in our field, but pretty much mostly our field is a much more people person driven field. And so what you do is you interact with clients and you work as a consultant. Now that role as a consultant, and I kind of jump into the second bullet here, is internal or external. So you could go to work for a large firm like AT&T, and you work in the instructional design field or Home Depot. And what you'll do is you'll work with people who are more knowledgeable of a specific technology or domain or process, and you'll help them design and develop a piece of content. So you're basically serving as a consultant internal to the company, or you're working for a company, or you have your own company that is a instructional design and development consulting company, and you get clients and you go and work with those externals. You're coming in as an external person to do that consulting. But I like this definition by Block. A consultant is a person in a position to have some influence over an individual, a group, or an organization, but who has no direct power to make changes or implement programs. So you don't have the power, but you have the ability to influence. I think that's a key idea. So what skills? You do need technical skills, but those technical skills are not just computer technology skills. They're also sort of an understanding of the ADDIE process, instructional design process, and having so the technical skills are process skills as well as computer skills. And really, as I said, our field is a field which is largely a people-oriented field, because what you really need is you need to have interpersonal skills. I often talk about when we cover the multiple intelligences, Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, that when you do sort of the self-assessment in the ebook, I find that a lot of the students in our program really score pretty high in interpersonal intelligence, because that's sort of the needed ability in our field, is you really need to be able to interact with people quite well. So we're going to go over the 5 processes or stages of consulting, but I'm going to start by looking at the ADDIE model and how it relates to those 5 stages. So I'll elaborate on what the 5 stages are, but let's just take a quick look at that. So ADDIE begins with analysis. Consulting begins with entry and contracting. And so you enter into the relationship, you start to collect data, you start to understand the problem. Then you have data collection and diagnosis. Again, very much as part of the ADDIE model, pretty much part of the analysis phase and beginning to do the design phase. Feedback and decision to act is really really probably have an arrow back to analysis as well there, and a really small arrow to development, because you're really not into development as part of the consulting here. And then implementation maps directly to implementation, and evaluation maps to extension, recycle, and terminate. So let's take a look at these 5 phases. So again, these 5 phases map pretty directly to the ADDIE process. And really, entry and contracting is the initial meeting and problem exploration. So when you think of analysis, you're really trying to understand the problem, and you're trying to figure out all the parameters of the problem, and you're really trying to figure out if it's a lack of knowledge and skills problem, which requires training. So you do that at the entry and contracting, but then you also engage in data collection and diagnosis. And so this is where you are allowed to do the deep dive on what the problem is and whether it's an instructional problem or not. So then you give feedback and decision to act. So this is where you report in some way what you've learned, and this is where you begin planning if training is necessary. So you're engaging with the client, you kind of understand the problem, you really define the problem, you sort of make a decision about what the solution to the problem is, and you begin the planning phase of executing that planning. Now, implementation is to carry out the plan. So implementation, really, I probably should draw a line from development at this point, because that's where you're going to develop and then implement it with the target population. And then at the end, you're looking for extensions, recycle, or termination. You're evaluating and deciding next steps. And so when I've worked as a consultant, often this is the point where you really, I hate to say it, but you're looking for that next job. You're sort of closing up with this particular job. You're helping the client understand that you've solved their problem, and you're looking for other problems that you might be able to address as a consultant. So then there's sort of the affective side of consultants. So your responsibilities need to be balanced. And one of the things that happens all the time in this class is that people sign up with a client, and then the client thinks, oh, I'm going to get a course or a module built for me by students in the 6200 class, and so I don't have to do anything. Well, that absolutely is incorrect. The client, your subject matter expert, has a lot of work that they have to engage in. And so you need to find somebody who's willing to share that responsibility, that the approach to the design and development of whatever you're building for this class needs to be balanced. So another part of the process of getting them to engage with the content is to help them feel like they have ownership of the project. And so you might be working with somebody in Parks and Recreation, and you're designing some training for camp counselors, but the expertise of the camp counselor is with your subject matter expert. And so what you want to do is you want to design it and you want to build it, but you want to help them retain that ownership so that they have complete buy-in with the product. That does two things. It keeps them engaged, but it also drives them to the end where they actually are going to use whatever it is that you've developed. And part of that whole process is developing this trust relationship between you and your client. And then you also have to make sure that you're meeting your own needs. And that really just depends. I mean, you really want to make sure that you're, in this class, what that means is that you're designing and developing something that you think is pretty important and will have an impact with some learners down the road. So there's sort of three roles in consulting. There's the expert role. The expert sort of kind of comes in and does sort of prescription. The expert tends to be engaged in entry and contracting, data collection, and diagnosis. And so maybe feedback and the decision to act, but they sort of stop at that point. They're really coming in as I've come in as Professor Michael Orey from the University of Georgia on a project to really sort of be the expert in learning, design, and technology, to give guidance, to understand the problem and give guidance on what that particular client needs to do. But sometimes the consulting role is really just bringing you in as a pair of hands. And so I've done this many times, and I've done this as contract work as a professor, sort of extending beyond my professorial role at the university, where I've worked with companies that needed people who were instructional designers and developers, and they just needed more people to do it. And so you're not coming in to help them understand the problem. They already understand the problem. They already know they need this, have this training need. They already have it sort of planned out, and you come in and do the design of this particular module and do the development for that module. And they're doing that because they don't have enough people to do it. And it needs to get done in a timely fashion. And then there's sort of the collaborative consulting role. And so to me, the collaborative consulting role is the best because you really are wind up being a part of the entire process. And so you're helping them to figure out whether or not it's a training problem to begin with and what the best training solution is. You know, a lot of times today people say, oh, we got to put our courses online. Well, a lot of times that's not the best thing. So you need to figure out what's the best strategy for that particular client. It could be that it's to put it online. It could be that it's if you put it online, it's best to use a live classroom for it. If you put it online, it might be a self-instructional module. You know, you have to, or it may be that you don't want to put it online. It's best if you do that face-to-face in some fashion. So. But the collaborative role, you kind of go from the beginning where you're doing the problem specification to the implementation and to figuring out what's next. And so the collaborative is sort of, in my idea, is the ideal consulting role. So in the expert role, you're basically identifying the problem area, and you define the problem and you define the solution. But you don't kind of carry it out any further than that. You really are coming in and just saying, being that expert and sort of being, it's like you bring in an expert in architecture or landscape design to help you figure out what you're going to do with your landscape. Now, you may want to do it yourself. You might not want them to do it. You're just bringing them in to kind of give you some ideas to plan what you might want to do. They're coming in as an expert role to give you that advice. So then there's the pair of hands. Again, this is provide expert knowledge of the product development, implements client solutions. So this is pretty much you roll up your sleeves and you do it. They just need another person. It's a way of hiring another person within their company that they don't have to have a long-term relationship with. And then the collaborative role, as I've already said, you co-define the problem and the solution. You're the expert in the process of co-design, but you go all the way from the beginning of the process to the end of the process. So which are you? Which kind of a role do you want in consulting? Well, I'm going to answer that question for you for this class, and that is that you really are going to be either doing the collaborative or the pair of hands. But more likely the collaborative is what you're going to do for this class. You're going to do the whole process from the beginning where you're defining the problem, figuring out the strategy, all the way through designing, developing, and implementing in the sense that you're going to do a small-scale implementation and do your alpha and beta testing for your formative evaluation. So then another kind of a useful construct for working with clients is to look at social interaction styles, and there are 4 interaction styles, and you could say that that you have one or the other, but really you have elements of all of them. So you kind of figure out your interaction style by answering these 4 questions. How do you prefer to work? How do you make decisions? What stresses you? And how do you interact with other groups? So, and the 4 styles are analytical, driver, amiable, and expressive. These are sort of the 4 styles. And again, you may be primarily analytical, but you may have elements of driver, amiable, and expressive as well. Or you may be more amiable and have elements of the others. So what's the analytical? The analytical is the thinking-oriented individuals. They have form. They're very formal in their relationships. They're cautious communicators, often perfectionists, non-emotional, introverted, and systematic. They love control and/or structure. Stress how is the problem solved? And typically, the analytical kind of person, if you're the consultant, is someone who's probably more interested in being the expert. Rather than the rest of it. But that's sort of the analytical. Now, if you're working with a client and they're sort of at this level of how do we solve the problem and not at the level of making it happen, well, that's going to introduce certain challenges for you. And so you're going to have to learn how to work with that client to work them through that process. The driver is more of an assertive, goal-oriented individual who wants results. They want to get it done. They're the one that wants to. They want to jump in and say, okay, it is training, and we're going to do e-learning, and it's going to be a interactive module that we program and articulate storyline. Now let's get at it and get it going. But they basically work, jump on it and work right through the process. The amiable person is the person who likes to make sure that everybody's happy, and they're very people-oriented. They accept authority well. They can express their personal opinions, but they avoid risks and confrontation. So they tend to be they're interested in fostering relationships. Relationships become a really important part of what they do, less so than actually successfully implementing the process. And then you have the expressive person, still a people-oriented person, dislikes routines, likes to express opinions and make quick decisions, often imaginative and creative, extroverted, stress who else has used the solution. And so that you can kind of put this into an X and Y axis, Cartesian plane here. And so on the vertical axis, it stretches between task-oriented and relationship-oriented. And obviously, the relationship-oriented people are the ones who are amiable and expressive, and the ones who are task-oriented are analytical and driving. And then on the horizontal axis, it's sort of from slow actions of avoid risk and being cooperative to fast actions, takes risks, and competitive. And so on the sort of asking and understanding the slow action, you have analytical up in the task oriented, or you have amiable on the bottom side. And when you're sort of looking for the solutions, trying to find the answers, then you either are at the driving or the expressive side. And so you can actually, I've added a little analytical tool that asks you to respond to a variety of things, and once you respond to them, you add them up, and you can actually place yourself into this Cartesian plane by going so far over on the x-axis and so far up or down on the y-axis, and you kind of place yourself in that. Now, what does that do for you? It doesn't do a thing for you. What it does for you, perhaps, is it helps you to understand who you are, and maybe will help you understand the people that you're working with, so that you can be better at fostering those relationships that are necessary for a client-consultant relationship. So for social interactions, to remember, this is only your dominant style. You have characteristics that cross over. I've said this already. Is anyone better than the others? Absolutely not. That's what they are. So what? How can this help you? What style is your co-collaborator? What's your client style? Well, I think that may be useful for you to help understand how to interact with them and what you're going to need to do. So as sort of a closing comment here, bottom line is you've got to have a client in this class. You've got to work with a client. And so what you need that client to be able to do for you is that client needs to give you some time, because they got to have time. They got to help you with the content of the module. They got to help you with evaluating your design. They got to help you with the evaluation of prototypes of what you're creating. And all those things take time. You need them to give you expertise in the domain, because again, you're going to be working with people who know the domain and you might not know the domain. In fact, it's best if you don't, so that you really are having the full SME kind of experience, where you're working with a SME who provides you with the expertise. They should also provide you with resources for your design. It could be textbooks, it could be images, it could be models. It could be a variety of things. It could be that they just need to talk to you, or maybe record some things, or provide you with some videos that they're aware of. Obviously, they're going to give you feedback on your design documents. They got to give you feedback on the prototypes, and give you access to the target population. So you want to be able to test your whatever you're creating with the target population, and often you don't know, you don't have access to that population, but the client does, so they have to give that to that. So bottom line, what do you need? You need to find a willing client. That's what you need to do. And so hope the idea of interaction styles helps you in some way, but the bottom line is you need to be working with the client. It's very interpersonal. It's really about building those relationships. It's about figuring out the solutions and driving to the creation of what it is. So there's elements of all that, all this process that you need to be able to do to be successful in this class. Good luck.